Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our topic. Tonight we have Central Maine Power, and we have Kevin Guimond and Kerri Therriault to present on the CMP Incident Command System Storm Response Planning. A little bit about Kevin and Kerri. Kevin has been with CMP as a manager of emergency preparedness since 2015. His current responsibilities include working with the Director of Electric Operations to plan for and respond for major outage events due to storm or non-storm related activities. This includes the drafting and implementation of emergency restoration plan, securing, training, and monitoring external contractors, and working with the Incident Command System, or ICS, with Maine state, county, and regional partners. Kevin currently also serves as the vice chair of the North Atlantic Mutual Aid Group and encompasses 28 utilities, and this stretches from Nova Scotia all the way to Pennsylvania. Kevin also worked for over 28 years in the South Portland Fire Department prior to joining CMP, and also serving as the fire chief, emergency management director, and homeland security director from 2003 to 2015. So when I said impressive colleague, I really meant impressive colleague here. Also presenting that night, we have Kerri Therriault, who is the Senior Director of Electric Operations. I forgot that I had a slide on with these two, SPIO as well, so you can read along with me here. Kerri started her career with CMP in September of 2001. Kerri has held several positions throughout her successful career, serving the longest within electric operations, where she was the manager of programs and projects, also the manager of planning and scheduling, and now she currently serves as the senior director for electric operations. In this role, Kerri is responsible for oversight and directing the daily activities required to operate and maintain the distribution system and to provide safe and reliable service for CMP customers. Always have that on the forefront. In addition to Kerri's daily duties, she is responsible for emergency service restoration planning and execution of that plan as the area commander and under the Incident Command System. Kerri graduated from the University of Phoenix with a Bachelor of Science in Management in 2016. So again, another impressive colleague that I'm excited to have here tonight to talk with the PMI Maine Chapter. Kevin and Kerri also wanted to make sure that the folks and attendees on tonight's meeting felt comfortable to ask questions throughout the presentation. And if you don't feel as comfortable asking questions directly and interrupting in the presentation to ask your question, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We do have folks monitoring the chat, and we'll be able to interrupt and ask those questions for you. Kevin and Kerri also plan on making this interactive, and we'll pose questions to the audience. So very informal presentation with a lot of good information, so encourage participation. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Kerri. And it's the big red button that's right there. I am a Teams person, not a Zoom person. So there you go, Kerri. We can see your screen.
My screen?
Yes.
All right, let me get it to presentation. All right. So first, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. I hope this will be informative. Hopefully we can learn from you as well. In talking with Danielle, we kind of talked about how this will apply to project management, and I hope that you will see that many of the components of project management apply to storm restoration. We have to have a scope, we have to identify stakeholders, we have a financial obligation, we have timelines, we have risks that we have to identify. We have an implementation phase and an execution phase. So hopefully you'll be able to tie all of this back. Kevin and I are going to alternate between slides, and he may rescue me through some of this. So he'll feel free to jump in wherever he needs to. So our objective tonight is to review how CMP plans, communicates, and restores power during a major event. We'll review how area command, incident commanders, and incident commanders use the ICS system, base and Central Maine Power's Emergency Service Restoration Plan, which we refer to as our ESRP. We'll also talk about how we communicate with key stakeholders, such as our emergency management agencies, the PUC, and fire departments. And again, as Danielle said, please feel free to ask questions, because this is much more beneficial if this is interactive rather than Kevin and I just talking through slides. So the first thing we want to talk to you about, and not assume that you know, is where does your power come from? And while I am going through this slide, I'm going to ask you to please answer the question of how many power generation sources are there, and what do you believe is a major source used? And you can respond in the chat. So power starts with generation, and one thing to keep in mind is that CMP is not a generator of power. In the 1990s, the legislature separated generation from delivery. So CMP is a delivery company only. And the generators supply the energy, which goes to the grid, which is controlled by ISO New England. From the grid, energy is transferred to a transmission substation, which then goes to our transmission system. Our transmission system would be those larger structures that you see when you're driving down the road through the right-of-ways. From the transmission system, the energy flows to our distribution substations, and these substations house very complex and expensive equipment. And when failures occur on the transmission or our substation system, those outages more often than not will impact a very large number of customers and may be extended due to the complexity. From our distribution substation, energy then flows to our distribution lines through three-phase, two-phase, or single-phase. So when you're driving down the road and you see 3 lines, that's your three-phase, and so on and so forth. And from those lines, the energy is then delivered to homes and businesses. So all of these components of the system can impact restoration times and plans depending on the event. So it's important to keep that in mind. So here are our sources of generation. And I did not look in the chat. So
I did look in, I looked in the chat. Yeah, no, I looked in the chat, and we usually give this presentation in person, and this is usually a good jumping off point, because a lot of people in the chat think it's hydro or wind or solar. And as you look at this chart, and this is from ISO New England, and today would be very similar. I took this on a sunny day. Solar is 27% of the 10% of renewables, so it's only 2.7%. Most of our power comes from natural gas and nuclear in the state of Maine, and that's pretty consistent all year round.
Right, and you'll see when you get your CMP bill, you have 2 components. You have a supply component of your bill, and then you have the delivery component, which is CMP's portion. All right, Kevin.
All right, one of my tasks as the manager of emergency preparedness is the emergency response plan that Kerri discussed. It is designed to facilitate an organized planning process for our area commander, which is Kerri most of the time. The emergency response plan is based on the incident command system, which is a nationally recognized system for managing incidents. The ICS system is the foundation for the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, and the National Response Framework. And a lot of this came out after 9/11. After 9/11, NIMS really took off in the ICS system. And again, Hurricane Katrina was another good example of that. The ICS organization is built around major functions that are applied to any incident, large or small. So local fire departments, police departments, and the utilities fit in there, whether you're a water system or a power system. It provides for that centralized management structure to enhance communication and coordination between decision makers. Maine Emergency Management and the Public Utilities Commission require CMP to work within the ICS system. This was a legislative mandate a few years back. And Emergency Support Function 12 is where we fit for that state plan. This on the left is what we call the planning P. I'm an incident ICS instructor. I've instructed all over the country, and every department knows what this planning P is. And the planning P, you start out, you could have an incident or event, or you're planning for an incident event, and you hold tactics meetings and you develop that plan and work around the P, and you set your operational period. So our operational period at CMP is really 24 hours a day. Sometimes we'll alter that a little bit. The workers usually work 17/7, but we can work 24 straight. And on the right's just a copy of the plan. Why do you have a plan? I did go down and worked in Katrina, and this is why you have a plan, because when Geraldo shows up, you're in trouble. And we try to stay out of the media in that way. We want to feel like we're organized. The picture down in the right, ICS came out of the wildfires out west. The fire service started it back in the 70s, and it's taken off now. Some of the best incident commanders, the Coast Guard for search and rescue, but utilities, I have to say, do a great job, and fire departments use it day in and day out for everything. So that's why we have a good ESRP. We don't want Geraldo here tonight. Is this one you, Kerri, or is this me?
That's you.
Still me. Okay. As I stated a few slides back, we are emergency support function 12. You can see down there under energy. So in a major statewide event, which we do have every couple of years, we fit into ESF 12. I talked to Pete Rogers before the event, during the event, and at least twice a day. He's the Maine Emergency Management Director. And if there's an issue in the state for energy, he would reach out to us and through our ESF 12 function. One of the things that came to mind, we had a major storm in April, right after the pandemic started, with over 230,000 customers out. And Pete and I were in discussions. Remember, at that point, right after the pandemic started, we had grocery stores that were lacking supplies. So we really put the medical facilities with COVID and the grocery stores at the top of the list, because we didn't really feel the state could have a grocery store go down. So that those became the popular items of the day for us. So we attacked those. Other parts of this, oil and hazmat response. Again, energy, we need oil. We need diesel fuel to move our trucks. So that could be important. We may need an airport to land supplies. We may need the rail systems to bring in poles. In the storm of October 2017, we had almost 2,000 broken poles, and we set them in 9 days. So we may need supplies, like right now with the supply chain issues, that could be a big issue. So this emergency support functions are very important to any incident to solve the problem. And that's what we do. We work just fit in with the state.
Hey, Kevin, I think we have our first question, and I'm sorry it's backtracking a little bit.
Sure.
I forgot that I was on mute when I tried to speak up. Rhonda's asking, how do Maine's power sources compare to the national supply of energy types? In other words, how things break down. Are we on par with what we're seeing across the country, or are we kind of unique around here?
I think we're on par. I mean, you look out in the Southwest, there's a little bit more solar, but solar and wind just aren't enough capacity. Part of the blackout in Texas, if you saw that, the windmills froze. They didn't have backup. We do have good backup in Maine, as you saw in the ISO New England chart. We actually have a 750 meg oil plant that we use very, very, very rarely. It's in Casco Bay on Cousins Island, but that's what we call a peaker plant. So if we have an issue, we can light that up, and it can really supply a large part of the state if we need it in an emergency. But if you go down south, there's a lot more nuclear. Down in Georgia, Florida, down south, there's nuclear. We do, as you saw, get about a quarter of our power out of the Seabrook nuclear power plant. But I'd say we're pretty on par. I mean, New England, the tough part for us, winters are long, cold. We're on the summer solstice today, so today's the most sunniest day of the year, hopefully. But I would say we're pretty much on par. New England's very fortunate because we do have those backup generation plants.
And we have another one. Benga is asking, has there been an increase in power outages over the years? Wanting to know if climate change has made things more difficult for CMP over time.
I'll let Kerri handle that one.
So I would say absolutely yes. What we are seeing is more frequent weather events. And the wind, if you have not noticed, if you live in Maine, the wind blows all the time now. Our trees are conditioned to sway, if you will, with the northeast wind. So when we have a nor'easter, it doesn't necessarily concern us as much as when the winds come out of the southwest or the southeast, because our trees are not conditioned to take on that wind. So when we start to get forecasts in that manner, we do start to ramp up because we know that there's going to be a lot more damage.
The other part too, with the winter, we don't get that cold, you know, 5 below zero blizzards anymore. And we can take 50-mile-an-hour winds with light, fluffy snow. It's the heavy, wet snow that we're getting that's really hampering us. And that's what was in that April storm. If we get that heavy, wet snow, like Kerri said, with the wind coming from the south, not the north, you know, the nor'easter coming up the coast, they really don't bother us. We can take 20 inches of fluffy snow and 50-mile-an-hour winds and have very few outages.
Absolutely.
And Kerri, we have one for you. What is the significance of the phases of power that you referenced regarding the transmission lines?
So your transmission lines, they're going to deliver the power down to the distribution system. But when you're talking about three-phase, those are really for larger areas. They have a lot more load on them. So businesses, highly populated areas, whereas a single phase line, if you go out in the country, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see a single phase. There's not as many customers that are pulling from that distribution system. So you're going to see a single phase distribution system through those more rural areas.
Okay, thank you. It looks like that's it for the moment. So let's continue, and we'll interrupt you again as they come in.
So I was looking at this and looking at my notes at the same time. Sorry. So our planning process begins many days before we're impacted by a major event. And I would guarantee Kevin and I are probably talking much earlier than anyone else when we start to see the weather. There is a big joke between Kevin and I that he knows he's going to get dinged as soon as I watch Channel 6 News, and his wife is usually poking him, telling him the same thing. So we will begin to monitor forecasts, and we are also thinking about how we're going to start communicate. When we want to start communicating that we have a level of concern that we are going to begin planning for, and what we're going to communicate in the planning process. So really our first level communication is to our executives. So my boss, the vice president, will start to communicate with him on our initial thoughts and what we think is going to happen. Everyone who has access to information knows that the weather is coming. So they are anxious to know what we're doing and what our thoughts and our plan is and what our initial plan is that we have in place. We will ask our managers to start conversations with their local county agencies or emergency management agencies, letting them know that we're monitoring the forecast, that we have a plan, take any questions that they have, and start to open those lines of communication and work with them on a daily basis as that plan begins to unfold. We also will work with the Maine Emergency Management Agency to let them know that we are prepared and we're going to respond appropriately. We want to make sure that they know who they can contact when an emergency arises, and we have worked diligently to build strong relationships with these emergency management agencies. We never ever want to hear an EMA official or a local fire chief or a politician tell us that they have not spoken to CMP. So we have multiple ways of communication, whether it's through phone or email. Our Director of Government Affairs keeps our politicians updated through summaries throughout the storm event. So we make sure that every stakeholder is fully aware of where we're headed with the plan. So we classify our events by different levels, and within those levels, it helps us to identify the anticipated damage for our customers and what we need for resources above what we have for internal resources. These levels really kind of put us in a lane for planning. They're not perfect. A lot of the planning that we do is based off our emergency plan, historical data, which Kevin's going to talk about that shortly. We've seen similar storms that have come through, and we just know in our gut that we need to get this amount of resources in order to have a safe and efficient restoration. An example of a classification is a level 5 minor to a level 5 moderate. Generally in these types of events, these are more regionalized. You'll see more damage in one area than another. If the storm's coming up the coast, we may have more impact on the coast, but our internal and our areas up closer to the mountains may not see as much. So we'll plan based off that. Planning for these events could mean simply holding crews at the end of the day. And we did that last Friday. We had storms rolling through, so we had to make a smaller plan to adjust for any thunderstorms, lightning, and wind that was coming through. We put contractors on standby so that we have them readily available. And in some events, we pre-stage a limited number of resources in the anticipated areas, and then we move them once the storm has rolled through and we see where the damage occurred.
Yeah, I put this slide together. It's kind of our bread and butter. It's just a thunderstorm, fire department responds for a tree down, and then CMP sends a couple crews, and we do this every day of the week. We have car accidents. I know the poles are 200 feet apart, but for some reason we have a car come into a pole almost every day. And if you're in the Portland area, you know, one circuit goes down, you could have thousands of customers. In the rural areas, as Kerri said, they don't impact as many customers, but we have car accidents almost daily that cause outages. So
we had a big one last night. That car caught on fire. So thankfully everybody was okay. So our major events are classified as a level 4 through level 1, with level 1 being the most severe. These events generally come with major damage and a large number of customers impacted, generally exceeding 65,000 customers. Planning of these events and the acquiring of additional resources such as line, vegetation management starts up to a week in advance of the weather report. Many people don't think about it, but for us, we're always the last one to get hit. So many of the states before us are planning way ahead of us, and they have a lot of political pressure. So people start to acquire resources early, and we have to keep that in mind and make sure that we're doing the same in order to get adequate resources in order to serve our customers. Resources are an important commodity, and early planning and securing of those resources are critical and have become more and more critical in the atmosphere that we live in today with the political pressure.
just to give you a hint, what is any guess on how many crews Central Maine Power has internally? How many crews do you think? 2-man crews, 2-person crews? Any guesses?
300.
We have 105 spread all over the state south of Bangor, up to Jackman. So,
So Kevin,
I wish I had 300. I wish I had 300.
Me too.
Just going to say, Vega asked a question around if the teams are made up of in-house staff or external contractors. So I think that we've addressed that question. And then another question's come through around CMP being, is CMP the only power distributor for the whole state of Maine?
So no, they are not. So we have Versant, which is north of Bangor up through the county, and then you have several consumer-owned utilities throughout Maine.
And I see a question about, are the crews distributed by population? And no, we have service centers all over the state, from Jackman, Stratton, or some of the smaller ones, down to Alfred, which covers most of York County, and then one in Portland covers most of Cumberland County. Then we have Brunswick, Lewiston. The bigger service centers have obviously more crews. I think Portland on the dock, Kerri, has what, 16 or 18 crews?
23.
23, okay. The smaller service centers up north have less crews, but that's my job is then prior to the storm, I push in contractors. But usually we hold all internals in place until we see where the damage is, and then we leapfrog where they are. I attribute it kind of back to my fire department days. You have fire stations in many neighborhoods in the city of Portland. However, we don't move the fire trucks in anticipation of where we think the fire is going to be. We wait to see where the fire is, and then we respond accordingly. And that's exactly what CMP does as well. So you'll see 6 or 8 crews head out of Alfred and Portland and head north if the damage is up in the mountains. But we always have to keep crews in the bigger service centers because, again, you have car accidents, house fires, and other emergencies. So that's what we do.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note we do have what we call master service agreement contractors. So we have about 60 crews that are right of first refusal for us. They cannot leave to support any other utility without our permission to do so. And then we have about 105 vegetation management crews that work on our system throughout the week. So anytime we move into a storm where we need those resources, we have those resources to start us out with the plan above what we already have internally with our 105 crews.
And we have sister companies in Connecticut that I can grab 40 or 50 crews from United Illuminating pretty quick if they do not get impacted, which is helpful.
Yep.
And then just one more question around how the decision is made where resources go first for large outages. Is there an algorithm that's used? Rhonda's asking this question. I believe that'll be covered later in the presentation as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I think we can answer that. So there's a lot of thought when it comes into the weather piece of it. Where do we think the biggest damage is going to occur? And Kevin and I will meet. He'll put a plan together where he thinks we should pre-stage resources so that we can quickly deploy them. Sometimes we will just stage them along the 95 corridor so that we can move them quickly, depending on where the damage occurs. So it's really based off where that first part of that storm is going to hit and the anticipated damage, and then we move accordingly based off what we see once everything's settled down. So pre-event preparations, we are very, very busy when we're preparing for a storm. I, as the area commander, and Kevin, as area command planning, will pull information to determine our initial event level projection, and that may change throughout the planning process. We'll go by the initial storm events, storm reports, and then as those begin to align, we may change the level that we're planning for. We start communication with our incident management team to activate personnel and determine all resources that are needed in addition to our internal resources. We schedule storm calls and begin email communications with the following information, which includes but is not limited to communication, overnight resources that we've scheduled, initial external resources for line and vegetation management that we've secured. We start to look at inventory levels. We have a storm trailer that we can move to set up remote service centers depending on where the damage is, so we make sure that that is ready to go. We ensure all of our IT systems are returned to normal and no testing or updates are being conducted during the weather event. We have fleet involved to make sure our trucks are ready to roll. We ensure communication specialists are available to update our system to reflect estimated times of restoration so customers can plan accordingly. And we talk with our customer relations center to make sure that we are ready and fully staffed to answer calls for customers.
Yeah, just to kind of tie in a little bit, this picture is of a mobile substation. And I know you all are project managers, and it's kind of funny because we do a lot of work very quickly. And I go back to a project management. I was kind of joking about the construction at Back Bay, and I said they should have let Chimbro do it because they built the bridge in a weekend. Well, my 7 years at CMP, they do a lot of work in a very short period of time. So we could lose anything from transmission to distribution or a substation. And this picture is an example. If we lose a substation, we have to actually move one of these monster trucks in and wire it in to take over a substation. And you can fix every pole and wire in a neighborhood, but if you don't have a substation, you're not going to have any power. So it's quite a task sometimes. So it's this specialized equipment's very expensive. We get some people that know, what they're doing. So it's pretty neat stuff.
It takes about 5 hours from the time that we determine that a mobile sub is needed to get it to the location and get it set up. So when there's an outage occurs and a mobile is needed, those restoration times are going to be quite extensive.
Yeah, a couple of Christmases ago on a Christmas Eve, there's a few small little independent power companies in the state, and they don't have any of this equipment. I think it was Madison Power called us on Christmas Eve, and we loaned them one of these substations on our employees, or else they would have had no power in the town of Madison. So when you need them, you need them.
Absolutely. And that's our substation folks that manage those. All right. Planning for weather. So we pull our data from several weather resources. We have 3 internal weather services that provide us with weather reports twice a day, every day. We also look at the National Weather Service. Kevin will pull weather reports from the National Weather Service, and we watch our local weather. It's important for us to pull from all of these resources because, believe it or not, they can all be looking at the same data and everybody has a different interpretation of what's coming. So we monitor this on a daily basis. And as we get closer to the event and those weather services begin to align, it gives us a better picture of what we're really going to be facing for the event.
Got time
Next
for, got time for one question. We have somebody asking, how many mobile substations does CMP have?
I think they have between 8 and 10, I believe.
Yeah, and I know right now we have like a couple in Westbrook in the southern part of the state, and the rest are in Augusta, and because they take a lot to move. They're not like a pickup truck.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, this is yours.
Yeah. So just to tie into what Kerri says on weather, we do have an analytic weather program that looks at past storms and damages, and this is just one snapshot of a year. I think it was 2018, and all the storms of that year. We do roughly 20 storms a year. And as you see, I track every storm, big or small. So you have a few storms in here that were only 5,000 customers with just wind and snow, 40, 50 mile an hour, but the temperature was 10 below zero. And then you can push all the way forward into October. In the fall, we take different weather. We have all these weather events back to, I think, 2006 or 5. And prior to the storm, Kerri and I will talk, and I used to do for the same, before Kerri, there was another gentleman in the role. I'll give Kerri 3 to 5 similar storms, similar time of year. It's very important to pull from the same time of year. We get different storms in January than we get in October. The shoulder seasons, I would argue, are the worst. The shoulder meaning the spring, when we're coming out of a cold winter into spring, like April, March, we get worse storms. And that fall, when you could get a hurricane or a tropical system into October, November, prior to the ground freezing. When the ground is frozen, especially up north, the trees aren't blowing over. We're getting limbs and we're not getting whole trees. So we look at those shoulder seasons, but as we prep for a storm, I go into these historical weather events. I pull 3, 4, 5 storms, give them to Kerri to try to put us in a lane, like she said. Are we talking a 20,000 customer outage, or are we talking hundreds of thousands? I have provided, I'm pretty good friends with Don Dumont over the National Weather Service. We have given him all of this data, and we talk regularly during storms with the National Weather Service. He'll ask us what we're thinking for outages. And it's good to have that that contact with National Weather. But like Kerri said, we do also have internal meteorologists that work for us that provide us their utility spin, not just what you're seeing on the local network news. So it's pretty important to track the storms.
Yeah, and I think another important piece to this, Kevin, when you're talking about the shoulder season, that's when there's leaves on the trees. And when there's leaves on the trees and you get those winds, the leaves actually act like sails, and they're going to bring a lot more damage to those trees because they're going to pick up that wind and really move those trees around.
Yeah, and I mean, people talk about climate change. It's not necessarily global warming. Like right now, we've had a very cold spring. It really hasn't hit summer yet. So If I go literally to our Connecticut companies or New York, they've been in this summer for 3 or 4 weeks, and we're not there yet.
Yep. All right, so we're going to talk about the incident command system. This picture actually is during one of our conference calls during a storm event, and everybody that's involved. I think it's important for people to remember that storm restoration just doesn't involve a lineman going out and putting wires and poles up. There's a lot of people working behind the scenes to make this happen. So area command, which is Kevin and I, is really about planning and overseeing the plan through execution, where incident management is about the execution of the plan. They're really the boots on the ground, and there's many different resources that go into that. So here is an example of our incident command org chart. So the area commander is responsible for the overall event. They are the people that are making the decisions and directing the people that are below them. You can see from the chart that there are many facets to incident command structure. So you have the planning piece. You have someone who oversees food and lodging. And when you're trying to feed 1,500 people and find lodging for them in the state of Maine, especially in some of our rural areas, you need to be very creative. And we have someone that is a bulldog when it comes to food and lodging. There's an environmental component. We need to make sure that we have environmental people on call to ensure when we have transformers come down that those oil spills are cleaned up and collected appropriately. Customer service, inventory, IT, power restoration, which also involves damage assessment. We can't really restore until we know what we have for damage. The linemen, vegetation resources, transmission and substations, and our energy control room. We also have a financial component. What we spend for money is impacts our customers, so we need to be prudent with our resources and make sure that we're planning accordingly. And safety is always our top priority. It is at the forefront of everything that we do when we are planning for a storm. Or anything we do throughout our operation starts with safety. You, Kev?
Yeah, I guess I have the next one. I think there was a question a little earlier I saw pop up about how we make determination of where we go for restoring power. One thing we heard after the 2017 windstorm, when we had 430,000 customers out for 8 or 9 days, everybody gets nervous after about 3 days and they want to be number one on the list. But we actually do have a very methodic priority list, and this is it. This is right out of our emergency plan. This came out of the legislature, out of Maine Emergency Management. And the first thing we do 24/7, 365, we do it right now, is respond to immediately life-threatening situations, public health and safety. So if a fire chief right now is at a structure fire on Congress Street and he has a life-threatening situation and wants to dump the grid, we dump the grid for him. We also would send a troubleshooter out on every structure fire, car accident, to make that scene safe. So our first responders, whether it's an ambulance or a fire truck, public works, are not getting in trouble and get electrocuted. So responding immediately to life-threatening situations is our priority. The second priority, and this was new, is making safe and road clearing. And you may want to know what that is. What we do is we have a big event. Our first priority after life-threatening situations is to send out strike teams of bucket trucks to make the wires safe and clear the roads. And this is so the fire, police, first responders, the ambulances can get into some of these tough areas. One of my best examples, we had issues in Harpswell years ago. Castine, Maine Maritime Academy, is like 15 miles from Route 1. We need to have that route all the way out to Castine with 1,000 students so they can get back and forth safe. So the first thing we do in each division is we go out and we make everything safe, cut and clear the wires so we don't have, God forbid, someone touching a wire, coming in contact with our equipment and getting hurt, and getting those roads open for the first responders. Once that's complete, then we fall into the methodic repair of our transmission, our substations, and transmission power lines. Remember, if we don't have transmission, we can't fix distribution. I kind of look at it like if you didn't have Sebago Lake with water in it, the pipe to Portland wouldn't help you get water out of the fire hydrants or drinking water. So it's the same kind of deal. You have to have transmission and you have to have generation to get to the distribution in those substations. Now, some of these or all these processes happen at the same time. We have a transmission team. They'll report up to Kerri and say, I have multiple transmission lines out. Here's how we're going to fix it. We have helicopter flights to see where those transmissions lines are down, because remember, many of the transmission lines are in very, very, very remote areas. They're not roadside that you can see. We've used drones. We have a couple contractors that use drones to fly the sub-transmission lines. And then we go to distribution facilities. Then we look at hospitals. We go to three-phase circuits. Kerri kind of talked about the difference between three-phase and single-phase. I'm sitting in my home tonight. I live on a single-phase line, which would be last to be fixed. It's down the list. I have a generator for that reason, or I wouldn't be married still, because I go to Augusta to the storms, but I'm down the list. If you're a manager, an incident commander in Portland, Alfred, Stratton, Lewiston, we can show the outages by circuits, and we go to those single-phase or three-phase circuits with the most outages. So if I can send 3 trucks and bring on 1,200 customers, or 3 trucks and bring on 6 customers, where do you think I'm going? I'm going to get the 1,000. And that's what we do, is we walk down through the list. I had a customer call me from Fry Island several years ago, one of my funny stories. It was in February. There's no power. She was worried, her thermostat, her Nest, she was monitoring it, and her house was freezing. And I said, there's no ferry to Fry Island till April. You know, if you can get a ferry running across the ice, we'll be out there tomorrow. But we literally methodically work the circuits. We try to get the most bang for our buck. Service cables. A service cable is just a house service. Comes from the pole to your house. Again, one customer down the list. And then, as I talked about Fry Island, seasonal customers. Remember, we have a lot of islands up off of Belfast, Rockland. We have 7 or 8 in Portland Harbor. The islands, the seasonal customers, Jackman, you know, it depends on the time of year. But they become last. So that's how we work the outages. I'm going to open it up for questions, because this is where we get the most.
I just wanted to add a little bit too, Kevin, that there are other components that make this a little bit more complicated depending on what's going on. So during election season, we have had major events. So we need to make sure that we're keeping all of the voting places open so that people can still go and vote. During COVID, we had many COVID critical facilities that we could not allow to go down. We had you got Abbott Labs that does all the testing kits, and then you've got Puritan Labs up in Pittsfield. That was the only place where they were making swabs to do the testing.
Yeah, I think you got to tie in the critical infrastructure in Maine. The critical infrastructure in Maine is the airports, the Port of Portland. You need the fuel. You need the fuel companies to get diesel fuel. We need Hannaford Brothers warehouses in South Portland, where all the food is. If we lost that distribution facility, none of us would eat. So, I mean, some of those priorities come out of Maine Emergency Management to say, hey, do you know there's no power at the Hannaford in Camden? Do you know there's no power at Rumry Road in South Portland at the Hannaford warehouse? If we lost one of the terminals in South Portland with the fuel, we have to go there. You know, if it's 10 below zero, you've got to go to those terminals, the airport. So we work with Maine Emergency Management to hit those priority. You know, we may fly stuff in to Brunswick Naval Air Station. You know, whatever is determined. Central Maine Medical Center in Lewiston, we have all the medical facilities. That's where we get our direction from some of the higher ups at MEMA, and work with Kerri to see what we can do. Again, if it was a regional ice storm that was affecting everywhere from the Canadian provinces down through Massachusetts, it was a wide storm. We'd have to make some tough decisions.
What's the difference between the transmission power lines in the third bullet and the circuits further down, the 3 and single phase circuits?
Circuits are after the substation. The best way I can explain it is transmission lines come in with the big power. They go into the substations. Substations push it out to your neighborhoods into the 3-phase and single phase circuits. Got it. Thank you. Yeah, like the heart, I would say like your heart then goes out to the arteries and veins. You know, it's kind of that kind of thing. We need those transmission lines into the substations, or we're dead in the water. Got it.
Hey guys, it looks like we have a question that may have already been answered, but I think a part of it might be worth talking about here. Part of it just says, do you have any discretion? And that'd be the interesting point. How much discretion do you have to either stray from, the mandate from on high, or do you have to be very rigid about that?
We have to be pretty rigid, and I'll give you the example. When I was a fire chief, we have 342 towns we serve, and a couple of fire chiefs would jump up and down and say, just give me a bucket truck. I want a bucket truck. Well, we have 110, 105. Tell me the 240 towns that don't get one. We have to be pretty rigid because, and I'll use another example. If we go into a blackout, believe it or not, you need power to make power. So you need to have black start power plants. I'm going to explain that a little bit. We don't have a slide on it. To get Cousins Island up and running, if we're in the middle of an ice storm and we have a blackout tomorrow, we lose all the power generation. You can't just turn on the generation. You need a black start plant. The black start plant for Seabrook is Westbrook, Calpine. The black start plant for Cousins Island is under the Casco Bay Bridge. The little jet, we call it. It's right near if you drive over the Casco Bay Bridge and you look down, there's a substation and a little tiny generation plant that never runs, hardly ever. But we need that to start Cousins Island. So it's a puzzle. So we have a little discretion, but not a lot. We have to really bring up our transmission, get our substations running, and Kerri will get that report. Kerri will ask, she's a pit bull. She'll say, I need a report out on section 72, section whatever in Belfast. We need to have those transmission lines up. And as quick as we can get in the air with a helicopter to go find out, and we've got some great people, and we've had transmission lines go down, 20 miles from the road, right, Kerri? So it's not it's not as easy as it sounds, but that becomes the key to getting stuff going. So we may have good feed into Portland, so we can get Portland up quick. I get hit in rural areas because Portland comes up quick. Remember, the peninsula of Portland is underground power. Now, that's good and bad. We don't lose underground very often, but when we lose underground, it is a mess to get it back, to find it. So it's, we have a little discretion, but it's really a puzzle, and you have to put it together, and Humpty Dumpty gets put back together the same way usually.
Yeah, and we do get pressure. I mean, we get pressure from legislators, we get pressure from the public, but if we don't stick to the plan, it actually could delay restoration for many people.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we move on?
I think we got one, two now. How do you find out if your area is a single or three-phase circuit?
You go in front of your house, you look
I
up
was
on
just
the,
going to say that.
yeah, you go in front of your house and you look up on the pole. If there's a big T on the top with 3 lines, that's a 3-phase. Most poles have 1 wire or 2 with the ground, and you'd be single phase.
Yeah.
And the next question is CMP in charge of the entire power line from the generation to the substation? I'll let you answer that one first. It's a multi-part.
That's a tough question, and I'll give you my example. Kruger owns a lot of the dams down in York County. Kruger is a Canadian company. They have tiny little hydro dams up and down in the state. A lot of the poles coming off of those dams are not ours. They feed like our substation. If you build a solar field, we don't own the poles from the field to the substation, right, Kerri? I think there's a disconnect at some point. Yeah.
It's actually an interconnection where they interconnect into our system.
Yeah, and this is all new. I mean, everybody wants distributed energy, and we're learning as we go, because remember, the system was set up to feed power from generation to your house, and now we're trying to bring stuff on the grid in many areas, and so it's going to take a lot of work of upgrades to get this, and some time to get it going, but we're working on that now. That's what's happening, as you're seeing all the work around the state.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. The second part of the question is the generation stations serving, do generation stations serve exclusively CMP, or do they have other companies connected to them?
They have other companies.
Yeah, the grid is the grid. It's everybody. That's one of the power on the grid. The electrons don't know where they go. So any power generation, whether it's Cousins Island or it's Seabrook Nuclear, jumps onto the ISO New England, and it can go wherever. And ISO New England balances that transmission need in the grid. All right.
The shoe still.
Yeah, this is, again, I talked about road openings and making safe, and these were just examples of what a mess sometimes our crews run into, and they do a really good job. It's often stressful, but these are really good examples of what they drive up on, and they have to come up with a plan, do it safely, try to do it in a methodic and in a reasonably quick manner. The picture to the right on the lower right corner is about a mile from my house, and those trees fell, and we'd sent crews out to restore, and they just couldn't get down the roads. We just had to send tree crews. So and as you can see, the bottom left is like 6 bucket trucks working there on some lines. I mean, it just takes a lot of labor and a lot of planning and a lot of knowledge. And we have some great people that come up with a quick plan. I always say too, it's the line workers go out, they come back with what's the damage, they develop a plan, and they go out and fix it. If we were going to construct that line on the lower half today on blue sky day to connect to your house or to your business, it would take us months to get approval to do that. By the time we went through all the environmental and the trees and et cetera, in a storm, we kind of have carte blanche to do what we want and do it quickly. And the guys and the girls do a great job.
And so just a story around Make Safe, because you wouldn't think that this would happen, but when I was a manager of programs and projects, I was traveling across our sister companies doing training with 2 other colleagues, and we were happening to drive through a small town where a thunderstorm rolled through, and the line came down in an elderly gentleman's yard. And as we were driving by, the elderly gentleman was actually going over to pick up the wire and move it out of his driveway so that he could get out. That wire was live. We literally slammed the brakes, jumped out of the car, and got him from doing that. But when we make safe, that is our top priority, because we don't want anyone to be hurt, and it has happened.
A few moments ago, Kevin used the term ISO New England. Can you expand on what their role is? Or maybe I misheard that.
Go ahead, Kerri.
They really control the grid. We are subject to them. They control the grid. It's hard. I'm not as familiar with this. If I had my husband in here, he could explain it to you very well. But we're really subject to them. If there's high demands, they'll have us do rolling blackouts or load shedding during peak seasons. They're really monitoring the grid to make sure that nothing's going to happen that's serious.
And they predict, and like tonight, they're predicting for tomorrow. You can go right on ISO-New England and look at it, live graphs. They predict tomorrow what's going to be for power needs. And Kerri talked about that. They then call on generation. So Westbrook gas plant may be running at 30% right now because the need is not that great. They project the need. They would light up more of that. They could light up Cousins Island. They go to the generators and tell them to produce power. I'll give you a hint, like Cousins Island is paid to be ready. They get paid every month whether they generate electricity or not, because they're a peaker plant. You can't at 10 o'clock at night tell solar to increase generation. You can't tell the wind to blow. You can't tell more water to go through Guimond Dam. If they see the need for power, they will pull on these other generations, and that's what they do, and they balance it. And as Kerri said, if we're in days that there were shortages, they then could ration the power across the grid.
And the other piece of this is on the transmission and substation side of the house. When we're doing maintenance and certain types of work, it requires an outage. We have to apply to ISO New England to take those outages. So they may determine that you're going to get the outage in October, and that's when you're going to do the work. So it's a very complex system.
Thank you.
All right.
Next slide.
Did you talk about me? Yeah, you did.
Yeah, we did. Yep.
All right. So planning process and incident action plan. So again, area command is the one that puts the incident action plan together. And incident command is responsible for the execution, as well as identifying immediate issues, needs, additional resource requests as they become apparent to ensure that restoration does not slow down. They oversee a very large storm team at the local level, which is a subset of each area that is a part of the bigger planning team. So execution at the local level is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where we get things done. They're the ones on the ground assessing the damage, prioritizing the work to get the most amount of customers on in the most efficient and safest way possible. They must not only coordinate and communicate with internal stakeholders, but they also need to keep the public agencies aware of what is going on and be able to respond to issues as they arise. They report out 3 times a day on what they've done, what they need, and their initial plan for the next reporting period. Area command will set key objectives each day, and the incident commanders will align their plan to those objectives to ensure we're all moving in the same direction to meet the same goal.
We develop the plans overnight, so we'll shift the resources. Like if we were in a storm right now, Kerri and I would be talking about where we want to be positioned for 5 a.m. tomorrow. So I would be moving crews tonight. Like if I had crews coming out of Alfred, I may be moving them to Lewiston tonight, putting them in a hotel tonight for 7 hours, so they're ready to work at 5 a.m. in Jackman or wherever we're going. So we do a lot of movement at night. This is kind of going to answer a little bit. We've been talking about our event classification levels. So 5 minor is 10,000 or below. You go to the far right is a level 1. Very quickly, this is in our emergency plan. So if you walk down through, it tells you how many trouble orders, potential circuit outages, and then in the bottom, which is what everybody cares about, how many hours estimated to restoration. So one of the things people want to know when their power is coming back. Well, the tough part is we kind of need to let the storm pass. But this gives us, if we know we're coming on a level, I would say the most popular major events are level 4s. So 60 to 180,000. We probably have 2 of those a year, many years 1. We know it's going to be 2 to 5 days. Obviously, if you're in a more rural area, you're on the 5 end. If you're downtown, you're probably in the 2-day range. But that gives people a rough idea. If once we have that peak outages, once we hit peak and we say, okay, we're starting to make some progress, we got 150,000 customers out, we're probably talking 2 to 5 days. And this is an emergency plan. Back to when I look at previous storms and I give Kerri 4 or 5 examples, we're trying to put ourselves in this lane. It helps us for logistical reasons. So we know how many hotels we need, how much supplies we need, poles, etc., like that. You can go to the next slide. So then how do we get to those lanes based on weather? So these are past other type of events we could have, and we look at the weather forecast and kind of plug in the matrix. So as Kerri said, we have foliage right now. So if you look at the second bold area, rain and wind with foliage. If we knew tonight we were going to have a big windstorm and we were going to have sustained winds of 35 to 45 with gusts over 50, and an inch of rain, that would put me in a event level 5, if you see right in the middle of the page. So we try to, again, that's just another piece of the puzzle to put us in a lane. If you go back, you go down a little further, heat, days above 90 degrees, our system, our substations, our transformers, if we have really, really hot weather, our system can have issues. So if we know we're going to have 4 or 5 days in a row over 90 degrees, we are going to have outages. We're probably going to have a level 5 event over those 3 days or so. You can go to the next page. This is just another tropical storm, hurricanes, blizzards, ice storms. If we're going to have over a ½ inch ice, we're in a level 5 event. That ½ inch ice is critical. So when you start, and that again, that's just trying to put us in an event level. And if you go to the next page, what does an event level do for me? It tells me how many external crews I need. So as I said before, I have about 105 Central Maine Power internal crews. If we're looking at a level 4 event prior to the storm, I'm going to try to purchase 100 to 150 additional crews. We bring them in, and we are in competition with every other utility for these crews. So we spend a lot of money, but National Grid has a $3 million storm budget prior to every storm. And their argument is, if we're only correct 1 out of 5 times, we paid for it. Because if we don't prepare and we have outages and it lasts 2 weeks, the fines that come out of the utility, the regulators pay for those crews. So it's a tough one. It's the market right now. They're in like every other profession. It's very difficult to get line workers. We're short, like fire departments, police departments, construction workers. It's very hard to get help. So when you go to the market to get these line workers, that's what I do. I'll call Chinbro. I'll call the locals first, obviously, and then I go south. Remember, if you are a contractor in Connecticut and you have a chance to go to New Jersey to make money today, are you going to wait 3 days to come to Maine? And the answer is no. We're on the end of the stick. So I often will go to Canada. I get one of the biggest questions is, why are you using Canadian crews? Because there are no other available. Now, the US crews say, hey, just wait for us. We'll finish up in Connecticut, finish up in New Jersey, and we'll drive to Maine. And do you really want us waiting 3, 4, 5 days? We just can't do that, especially if it's cold. People, 3 or 4 days without power. So we go to Canada quite a bit. And there is a lot of resources just over the border in New Brunswick. I get yelled at by contractors. We have crews in Philadelphia. I can go 20 minutes from Holton and get 200 or 300 crews. So should I go to Canada, 20 minutes from Holton, or should I go to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania and have them here in 3 days? And that's the decision Kerri and I work through every storm. Where do we go to get crews? So it's a tough one, and every utility is dealing with it. The bigger utilities like CMP have a kind of an advantage because we will take multiple crews, where some of the smaller utilities in New Hampshire and Vermont, they won't take as many. They'll take 10 or 15. A contractor wants to come with 50 crews. It's easier to manage 50 than it is 5, 5, 5. So anything else to add on that, Kerri?
Well, I just think too, the pressure that we face today for keeping the power on or restoring quickly, there's a lot of people that are working from home. That's the norm now. So if they don't have power, it's impacting their pocket in more ways than one. So that's part of the pressure that we face today as well.
Yeah, and the other one too, I'll say too, it's interesting is in New England, I say upper New England. If you talk Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, we have some difficult situations in rural areas. The Canadians and the rural utility workers are a little different than the city. We had some crews up from way down south a number of years ago, and they froze to death, weren't accustomed to working in the conditions that our line workers work in. So, I can get some Eversource crews out of New Hampshire. They're going to probably, in the contractors off of New Hampshire, Vermont, Green Mountain, et cetera. They know the environment, they know the terrain, which is it's a good fit for us, and the Canadians are. So when we start digging down into the North Carolinas, you never know what you're going to get. So we have good relationships with a lot of contractors. They love to work for us. CMP is one of the more organized storm response teams that I've seen, and so they like to come here, which is a good thing. So, and most of the public's very polite, and they appreciate what these people are trying to do for them. So it's pretty good. So you can go to the next slide.
Do we have a second to answer a question before then?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, so Stephen's asking, as project managers, we are often estimating. I receive restoration ETA estimates from CMP that I find to be quite accurate. How does CMP calculate restoration ETA estimates, and what contingencies are factored in?
So there is no scientific way that we anticipate ETRs, to be honest with you. We look at the damage, we look at the number of crews that we have, and our field crews really can make a determination on the estimated time of restoration. You can guarantee, if you have a lot of broken poles, especially along the coastal area where we have a lot of ledge, your restoration times are going to be much longer. Whereas if you're in the middle of Maine or maybe up in the northern part, you may not see that ledge. The poles are easier to set, but the more broken poles you have, that really is the determination of how long it's going to take us to restore power. If it's just branches and limbs or wires down, those can be put together much faster. So that initial damage assessment that we have after the storm impact is over becomes very important for us. So we can look at the overall damage and anticipate the amount of time it's going to take us to restore, and we'll set a global ETR. And then as the storm progresses, we start to set more regional goals when we have a better idea of how restoration is going.
And one of the question that just came up about smart meters, If I was having a storm right now, I literally can look to my second screen to the right here and watch the smart meters. And what we use those for is to see where we're taking damage. The problem is we can't tell how many broken poles there are. I can't tell how many sections of wire are down, but they do help us know that we have impacted areas. So the smart meters are great, but as Kerri said, we need to get in the field and see what we have for damage. As you guys know, as project managers, if it's a limb and trim, I'll call it a limb and trim. If it's just limbs, and Kerri will talk to our incident commanders, and I'll use Dennis LaJoy down in Alfred, say, Dennis, what are you seeing for damage? And he'll say, no broken poles, it's all limbs. I can get everybody on by tomorrow at 5 p.m. That's what Kerri's looking for info. I move up the coast to Brunswick. The Brunswick guy, again, as Kerri said, out in the peninsulas of Harpswell and Booth Bay, if they call and say, I got 65 broken poles, it's going to take time, I will be moving resources in. It's a different truck to drill a ledge pole than it is to drill an earth pole. And it takes time. You got to set the pole, put the transformer on the pole, run the wire to the pole. So we'll try to dig a lot of poles at night so we know we're going to hit the ground running at 5 in the morning. But we need to see the damage prior to really giving you a solid ETR. But the smart meters are incredibly helpful because like Kerri and I will watch and be calling each other saying, hey, we're at 10,000, we're at 20,000. And I'll say, hey, look, I'm seeing it west of Sebago Lake. Great example is we'll see a thunderstorm come through. I can watch the smart meters and say, hey, we're hit in Freiburg, Standish, Sebago, Raymond, but we're not seeing damage in Buxton, Baldwin as it came down through, and that's what we use the meters for.
Yeah, so when, we're watching those outages, if we don't see a lot of movement in a particular region, those managers are getting a call for me to find out what's going on, what's holding you up, what do you need for more resources, what can we do to make this happen? We're also asking, they report out, I said they report out 3 times a day. They're reporting out on the damage that they have, the number of broken poles, how many have been set, how many we have left to set, how much of their assessment is done on the 3-phase circuit and the single-phase circuits, so that they keep everybody apprised of what's going on throughout the day.
If we have catastrophic damage in a community, and we did, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I think we had Brunswick area and Cape Elizabeth that were just flat, right on the, Cape Elizabeth had 0 customers with power. We dumped in like 6 CMP crews and 30 Canadian crews and said and we put Bev Allen as incident commander of the town of Cape Elizabeth and said, tell us what you need, go away, fix it. And they had, 60 broken poles, but we couldn't get into the granularity of ETRs. They were literally rebuilding that town, and they did the same thing in Brunswick, I think, that same storm, and we broke them off. So we will do that if we have catastrophic damage in a community, like a microburst. If a microburst hit Freiburg, we would break Freiburg off and literally dump a project manager in there and just rebuild that system. So
that's where our mobile command center comes in too.
Yeah.
We'll take that mobile command center, we'll staff it up, and then we'll assign crews. So we kind of break the area up so that we have a more focused restoration effort in those types of situations.
Kevin and Kerri, we have another question here around the project management department that Avangrid and CMP has, wondering how many project managers do we currently employ in our organization?
In my organization, I have no project managers. My managers are my project managers.
Right.
We do have, at the Avangrid level, we have process and technologies and programs and projects, and they have several project managers that manage. And these people are managing our large substation projects, large transmission projects. We have, under our director of system operations, we do have a project group that is managed by Christina Bondariva. So she will oversee different programs such as our distribution line program, broadband, our Maine DOT projects, big road projects. She'll oversee those.
All right.
Yeah, this next slide is, I don't know if there are any more questions.
There are no more questions. It
Okay.
looks like we have a few Avangrid folks here that have somebody from projects says that there are about 20 plus project managers within the projects group. And then myself, as a project manager with Avangrid, I am in our operational smart grids group, or supporting their capital investments. So they're sprinkled throughout our organization. And then while I was talking, just one more question, Kevin did come in really fast. Do you use computer simulators or tabletop exercises to pre-plan for events?
Yes, and yes, we have a SIA computer analytics program that again uses all of our past storms and damages. So we'll get an analytics report, which will tell us based on the current weather forecast, we're projecting, 200 incidents and 32,000 customers out. It's a tool. It's a piece of the puzzle. It puts us in a lane. Doesn't mean we won't have 60,000 out. So we use it, the analytics, and we do tabletops every year to plan. I'm actually going to one next Wednesday in Saginaw County. We try to get out with the county EMAs and do them with them for the power outages. So I'll be in Saginaw next Wednesday. This next slide is again about pre-staging. Based on our events, and I've walked you through how we pre-stage extra crews. Regulatory requirements, Maine is not quite there yet, but I got to be honest with you, regulators in New York, Connecticut have become very aggressive at crushing utilities. So utilities have taken a very aggressive approach to pre-staging, and they will spend millions and millions of dollars to hire trucks based on forecasts. Mutual aid has evolved into a first responder approach. And again, I go back to my analogies, and I am currently the chairperson of the North Atlantic Mutual Aid Group. And I have this discussion with utilities every storm. They suck up all the resources. And if you're not in the game, you're going to be left with your butt hanging in the wind. And it's just not right. You have utilities that have 50 crews and they'll hire 500 for a storm, and then they don't get hit. And they hold them too long. And my argument is, if you're going to purchase crews and you don't get hit, you've got to kick them out as quick as you can to other utilities. But it is not just a CMP issue. It is all over the country. You see it in Florida. If you see a hurricane coming, you'll see parades of trucks driving through Maine to get to Florida. Duke Energy does the same thing and sent to the Mid-Atlantic. We had a lot of outages last week in Canada, up in Ontario from microbursts. So it's a crazy, there aren't enough resources right now. So they called storm chasers for a reason. They chase the storms, they make a lot of money. It's just where the utility world is now. I go back to, does every town need a ladder truck? Probably not, but everyone has one. Does and that's the same thing with utilities. It's crazy money.
So I'm assuming, Danielle, that we're at 7:30. So I don't know.
That's really the program, actually, just a couple more fluffy slides. So we're pretty much there.
Yeah.
By all means, give us the fluff.
Yes.
So this next slide is about the communications with our EMA partners and our first responders, which we've talked about throughout this, but it is an essential piece. I would say one of the most important pieces when it comes to our storm restoration. Being able to communicate with them and work in a partnership with them as we plan the resource. And then once we're in the event, they're really our eyes and ears on the ground. They're telling us where we go to open roads, de-energize lines, make it safe for the public. We do not want to be in a situation where someone needs to get out of their home and an ambulance or a fire truck cannot get into them. So these partnerships are key to our overall success in any major event. The communication between the company and the agencies is ongoing throughout the year, and it doesn't just occur in an event. Just as Kevin said, he's going to do a tabletop exercise in Saginaw County. So we continue to build those relationships throughout the year and maintain them. This is really our workflow associated with each partner. We have state level liaisons that reach out to the Maine Emergency Management Association to discuss planning activities. We work with the DOT and state police through the state EOC on transportation priorities. At the county level, we work with EMA's directors to identify priorities from the local communities, and they represent, and our incident commanders work this priority list locally. We also work with the EMA directors when we have an outage, during the week, just to let them know there's a large outage, here's what's going on. Here's our estimated time of restoration, so they can communicate with customers or maybe large businesses that are impacted by those outages. Our CMP incident commanders have designees that reach out to the counties to establish liaisons in most events. That will be their contact throughout the event, so they're not trying to chase down people and figure out who they're supposed to talk to. We're all focused on the same goal, and that's to get power restored as quickly and safely as possible.
Yeah, I just saw a question about were there lessons learned, and this is one of the lessons learned out of 2017 is the liaison program we built. So we put a liaison with each county EMA director that requests them, and they get they have a live document. Some use G4S, some use Google Docs, Teams. So literally the city of Portland, we have a live document telling us the roads that are blocked. We get that out of Waldo County, Saginaw, York County is probably one of the best. So our PLOs give us live data of where those roads are blocked, and we can immediately go get those roads open. So that was one of the big lessons learned out of 2017. We were kind of blind for the first day or two.
And I think it's important to note that whenever we have a major event, we do have a storm follow-up. We put a team together to determine what we did very, very well and what we can improve on. So we are never stagnant in our storm restoration. We are always learning something new and putting new things in place to be better at storm restoration and service for our customers.
Yeah, I threw this slide in because this is
this slide.
Yeah, this is the building on the left is our Stratton Service Center, and we had a storm back a while ago, and they had like 4 feet of snow. That's a little bit north of Sugarloaf, and if you go to Sugarloaf, we had another storm the same year. That's the river flooding just south of Sugarloaf. So we have such different weather in this state. We have a great manager up there, Dave Dufour. He's been with the company 30 plus years. And I know Kerri leans on him like I lean on him, and you call and say, what's really going on up there? And the people in Northern Maine are very hardy people, so they will put up with a little bit more than we really do down here in the greater Portland area. But I love it when Dave sends me a photo of when you call him and you go, what's going on? He'll send me these photos, and you kind of, so I love this. Just remember conditions. If you're in Portland and you're like, hey, I don't have any power, but remember, it could be a lot worse in other parts of the state. And it's kind of what makes this job interesting. So that's why I threw this slide in.
Yeah, and I mean, that is challenging for us because if you're sitting at home and you have no power and you're looking out and the sky's blue, you don't know that the next town over just had a microburst run through and it's on your circuit, so it's going to impact your power. So we try very hard on social media and in the news to get pictures up so people can really see what's going on and how we're impacted. So it is always 100% about the customer. We are always thinking what we can do to get them restored as safely and as efficiently as possible. The plan is important, the execution is important, but what we have found is communication is key. Our customers have told us, we understand we're going to have power outages, but if you tell me what's going on, so do I play a game with my kids and have a pizza, or do I need to go get a hotel room for the next 5 or 6 days? That information is extremely important, and that is another area where we continue to improve and help people understand that information is what we need in order to better serve our customers. This is you, Kevin.
Yeah, this is just an example of, you know, what is how much work it is to pull this group together to implement the plan. This is the rest area on the turnpike on the upper right. We have to onboard our contractors because, again, remember, they're coming from other parts of the country. So we have about a 2-hour safety briefing. So one of the major storms, we had them stop at the rest area. We gave them their briefing, and then we sent them to where they were going. The lower left corner is an example of a Canadian crew working in downtown Portland with a CMP crew. And I like the root ball on the right because that's what I'm looking for information. If we're getting root balls, we're going to have a long day. If we're just getting limbs, then, you know, usually we can restore pretty quick. But if you see those root balls, the ground's not frozen, that's when we really have a lot of damage to our system. So I think the next slide's the best one. So the slide on the left is a guy trying to steal power with jumper cables, and the guy on the right is trying to put a fire out. But remember, no line is safe to touch.
And I think it's important just to note here too, when we're talking about safety, we're talking about our own employees and we're talking about public safety. You may or may not be aware that our crews work 17 hours a day and then they have mandatory rest for 7 hours. That's extremely important. Many, many years ago, they worked 24, 48, 72 hours a week without any rest. The other piece of this is when we have high winds, we cannot put our guys up in bucket trucks. They cannot be up in a bucket truck when there's 35 to 40 mile an hour winds, so restoration slows down. So safety is extremely important to us. When everybody's home, our guys are out on the lines and we need to make sure they're staying safe. So that is it. If
Thank you
there
very
are
much.
any other questions.
I'm seeing two more at the moment. One of them was, do you guys get to take vacations at all?
So we do. We have people that back us up that can step in when we're gone. But I will tell you, it's very difficult. When there's a storm going on, you want to be there with your company family. You want to be there to support them. So it's very difficult to just step away.
And I think the last one we're seeing here is curious as to how many level 1 events Maine has seen in the last 50 plus years. And thank you for all the great information.
I don't think we've seen very many.
No.
Maybe the ice storm, maybe.
Yeah, the storm in 2017 was not a 1, it was 467,000. So it didn't, wasn't as, but that's still a lot.
Yeah. I think our largest, I mean, for the most part, on average, our larger storms are in the 150 to 225,000.
I don't see any more questions, Luke, in the chat. I do have a comment here from Paul, who says he's been with the company for 18 years and has worked many storms and different support roles, and he still learned information tonight. So excellent presentation. And I also have an active storm role outside of my daily duties, and I learned a lot tonight as well.
I think we all learn. I think Kevin will agree that even in the roles that we have, we learn on a regular basis. There's a lot of smart people that work with us.
Yeah, there's always a curveball, and there's a lot of very intelligent people that have seen it before, and you just got to know who to ask to get the answer, because it's a crazy construction project. You do it for 2 to 7 days, and you work 24. Kerri and I are working 24 hours a day. There aren't many hours we're not working when a storm hits, and it's crazy, but it's exciting, and that's why you do it.
I will say that storm is probably my most favorite part of my job, and that probably sounds crazy, but that's where relationships are built, and it's the one time that everybody in the company is focused on the same goal.
You don't have to get a purchase order to get something done either.
No.
Oh goodness. Yeah, the tones that in the storms I've been involved in have always been very positive. Been difficult situations that the group works for, but everyone seems to stay positive and really focus on that end goal. So thank you so much, Kevin and Kerri, for the wonderful presentation, for the examples. It was very interactive, lots of great questions from those who were in attendance. We kept a pretty strong participation rate, even with 10 minutes past the end time. So I think that goes to speak for the presentation itself. I'll go ahead and turn it back. I'm sorry, is there another question or comment?
I was just going to say, Danielle, we talked about, doing this in person. It may be worth at some point in time, maybe doing a tabletop exercise with your group to see how they would work through a storm situation.
I think I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, I guess.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, Kerri and Kevin. We really appreciate your presentation. It was really awesome.